the city didn't allocate enough money towards the program at that time. I believe it was maybe $250,000. And in between no one responding to the RFP and now, since the new new administration, in a sense, the state has funded a program, a mental health crisis response program that is funded, and we've been assigned Trilogy as our agency that provides mental health crisis response in Evanston. And I think the thought was initially that Trilogy would really be could provide a response to 911 that could provide an alternative to 911. And I think in a little bit of time, they've been on board. And again, this is still really fresh, and we understand they're going to continue to expand their hours of operations and make adjustments as needed. But I think what we've noticed is the main concern, and Dr. King spoke to this, is right now it really isn't first response. I think tops need about 60 minutes to respond. And then even on slow days, they might need about 20 minutes to respond. And we know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but but emergency response really is, I would say, 5 minutes or less, maybe even, and so I don't think right now it's set up to be first response. Not only are they assigned to our area, Evanston, but they're also assigned to the north side, certain parts of the north side of Chicago, and I think some other suburbs, maybe possibly Skokie. I would need to refer to the map. And so I think that's an area of an area of concern right now. If we want a true community responder model, an alternative to 911, and then the other area Dr. King also pointed out, which is they really focus on mental health related calls and not those nuisance calls and disturbances and conflict between neighbors. And then also it really isn't. I'm trying to see how you always say it, because I love the way you put it, Dr. King. The credible message.
Credible messengers. Yes.
It's right now. It's not. They don't employ people from our local Evanston community, which I think we should have an element of that one that aligns with what we're trying to do in terms of local hiring. But in sensitive matters such as this, I think it could be extremely powerful, and to have someone responding to calls that people are familiar with, and someone who's familiar with the city. So while I think it's a benefit, I think it's a good start, and it will certainly play a role in helping us respond to mental health calls. I think there's still some work to be done. So I just wanted to try to stitch that all together. And if anybody has any questions, really quickly, we got 5 more minutes with Dr. King. Now that you have a bit more context on their role, feel free to unmute.
Well, I see Rose has a question that she asked. Well, she says she has a question about credible messengers. So,
yeah, I'm wondering if you could flesh out a little bit more what you mean by credible messengers. I've heard about it in terms of like street outreach for like gun violence, but what would that mean for this type of crisis response?
Right. So, a credible messenger would be an individual who may not have a master's degree in social work, but I like to say they kind of have a master's degree in credibility in the community. So there was like the ceasefire model, where they had individuals who were from the community to kind of go in and mentor. But you can take those same individuals and properly train them in conflict resolution, mediation, and also send them into the community to handle, again, very low-level calls, disturbances between neighbors, intoxicated persons, suspicious persons calls, because we often know that the suspicious person call, the description of a suspicious person is often a 6-foot-tall African-American male. And these credible messengers may be able to understand and contextualize that call a little bit better than an armed police officer who is not from the community, often comes in from another area just to work to police in the community. Credible messengers may have the relationships to kind of resolve conflicts, to know that this individual is not a suspicious person. He's just the brother working, and he got off late from work, and that's why he's walking down the street. So that I don't know if I explained fully what the credible messenger is, but just to in brief, it is they would be individuals who have social capital within the community, who are trained in mediation and conflict resolution, who are unarmed, who can go into communities to kind of handle low-level call types. If that would be my definition. Amos, would you define it another way?
No, absolutely. I think that this is being done, for example, in Newark and in Atlanta, and of course in Evanston. That would look a little bit different as far as who would be the ideal responders. So yeah, I see Patrick has a question.
Thank you. I would just say, just for purposes of recording, that Trilogy does have a peer responder model too. So it was really important, I think, to Evanston and thankfully the Pritzker administration, our governor, that the mental health alternative to 911 be a pair of very similar to what you said, Dr. King, a social worker and a peer support specialist, because we have seen in other municipalities a social worker being accompanied by a police officer, and our community, I think, quickly recognized that would defeat the purpose of this truly being an alternative, and thankfully our governor did too. My question is about this community responder model being utilized, and I apologize if you did cover it, I was a little late. If this model's been utilized for traffic enforcement purposes anywhere? Because that's another exploration that our city is doing, is whether or not we could also off-ramp certain traffic stops from law enforcement.
I'll let Amos handle that, but I believe there's some concern about whether, and a jurisdiction that I believe questioned it. I believe that police officers had to actually do the stopping of individuals. I'll let Amos take that question because I don't want to say.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so that's a great question. In my mind, there's sort of three buckets. So community responders address a large range of issues ranging, mental health, addiction, homelessness, and then sort of, conflicts, juveniles, those types of issues where it's like trying to kind of manage a situation and resolve it, and no formal action needs to be taken, but maybe referrals to services, things like that. That's what we would fit in as like community responders. And then there's what I might call administrative alternatives, or like report taking. There's a large percentage of calls that are things like fender benders and, somebody broke my car window and stole my phone. And those are also calls that do not need an armed officer showing up to the scene right away. And then the third category is, and I know that Evanston has done a bunch of research on traffic stops, and I don't know if there are specific recommendations, but when we've worked with other cities, our recommendation is just to, change police policy to stop doing these low-level basically pretextual stops where police will do kind of fishing expeditions. A lot of the issue with traffic stops is not that you want somebody different doing the traffic stop, but that it doesn't need to be done at all. And so that's sort of the easy answer for a lot of those situations, and sort of the, oh, I'm going to pull somebody over for not using a turn signal and then try to get them to agree to a consent search or hunt around for some, probable cause. That's something we just try to have nobody do that, because yeah, as Lionel said, in general, the pulling somebody over is not generally allowed for like a civil, non-police would not be able to do that. That's, I believe it's, it relates to law enforcement powers and maybe considered, some sort of kind of use of force or detention. that just a regular person can't do. So those are sort of different categories, but I'm glad you brought that up because there are several things that are important beyond community responders and that relate to sort of the scope of these everyday police activities.
Before I go, it's 6:32. I just wanted to ask the question, maybe anyone who would like to respond. What are you guys' thoughts on the Trilogy response team and the work that they're doing? I just want to get I know they're brand new. I believe they started January 10th, but the idea, the implementation, but also what are your thoughts and what have you heard about it? Don't all jump in at once.
Respond to that. Does anybody want to share their thoughts on Trilogy? Again,
I think Patrick.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I'll jump in and just say that. I didn't introduce myself. My name is Patrick Keenan Devlin, and I am the executive director of Evanston's Legal Aid organization. And I will just say this is something that the Moran Center has been pushing for a number of years. So we're really excited to have this alternative to 911 for crisis calls, and really excited that Evanston laid the groundwork for what is now a statewide initiative. So I think we really had a lot of the thinking and logistics already thought through. And all we needed, as Alderman Burns mentioned, was the money, and the state thankfully came through with the dollars in order to make this dream a reality. So I'm thrilled by it, and I'm thrilled also though that Alderman Burns brought LEAP to the conversation, because I think that the model that Trilogy, and also we haven't mentioned thresholds, but this living room model that will accompany the mental health crisis calls, that what you're talking about is, as I often refer to, is a both and. Like, it's not in exclusion to this concept of a mental health crisis call, but I really appreciate what you've laid out tonight, which is further accompaniment to this alternative model. And as Mayor Biss has said during many reimagining public safety calls, it's trying to think through how can we limit as much as possible to utilize law enforcement for what they are their specialty, and to push out where to other experts, other professionals, community members, as you have laid out, where that would be the preferred and, by the way, more logical means of responding. So I appreciate everything I've heard tonight. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Patrick. Everyone on the call, I again apologize. It's 6:35, but I do have to go. But the brilliant Amos will be here to answer any further questions and to continue this dialogue. Councilman Burns, I will follow up in the email. And I believe that was Patrick who's recording, or was it Robert?
I think it's Matthew who's recording.
Matthew, okay, I'm sorry. I look forward to that email of this session.
Thanks.
Thank you guys. You have a great one.
Great to meet you.
Nice to meet you guys.
And just wanted to add, just so we're all on the same page about kind of terminology and definitions, that, and I could, again, Amos, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think so I'm very familiar with a peer, but a peer doesn't necessarily need to be a local person with, the way Dr. King put it, social capital. And so I just, Amos, want to make sure that I understand that correctly, because in my mind, I'm thinking of, again, a peer is someone that can kind of speak from direct lived experience, and it's not necessarily a mental health professional and trained in mental health, but can speak more towards their lived experience. But a credible messenger is when Dr. King says social capital, that strikes me as someone who, and it doesn't need to be this, it could be their social capital could come from their lived experience, but I kind of added another layer to it, which is they they have social capital because people know them in the community. So maybe you could talk a bit about how other places have kind of defined credible messengers. And I don't know if Newark is the place that has done this, or if there's some other examples. But I want to be clear that yes, Trilogy does have a kind of a co outreach team, and one is a mental health professional, the other is a peer, which I think is great. But again, my understanding of this is it would be a local outreach person.
Yeah, so thank you for asking that. And really I think the experts on this topic would be you all, because this is different in each community as far as who is going to be really, effective in this role. And, Evanston is very different from Newark and from Atlanta. And from many other jurisdictions. I know that, for example, in Amherst, they have sort of their 2-person team will have one. I'm not sure if they necessarily have a certification, but somebody with sort of a mental health specialty, and one person with a kind of a conflict resolution background. And some, they want to make sure that the teams really have a, diverse backgrounds so that they're able to really connect with people, from all backgrounds on their calls. And so there, obviously there's a lot of different things you're trying to balance, and, you want some level of expertise on certain issues. You also want people who are good at things like conflict resolution, de-escalation, mediation. You want people who can really connect with somebody from every neighborhood, and that it's a lot of things to balance. And I don't know if that's a helpful explanation, but really our main goal is to kind of free cities from thinking about, oh, it has to be a mental health clinician and a paramedic, which is the cahoots model. And it's like, okay, no, free your mind from that and think about, what would be most helpful to allow you to address the greatest possible range of calls.
Yeah, and I think Trilogy definitely has met that standard that you've just expressed. And I would say if we really want this to be a first response and able to integrate fully into our 911 call center, one thing has to happen, which is, and I've talked to Trilogy about this, we're likely going to need a designated crisis response team in Evanston. And this is something that I've kind of suggested early on, just listening to them even before they launched, and just hearing that they were going to take 60 minutes to get to a call. Again, I think we all know that's not quick enough to be a first response. And they said with some additional funding, and they need to do this for a few months to get some data in, so they know how much that additional cost will be to the city. But I think for additional, if we're able to provide funds for the program, I think Trilogy can come up with a model that allows them to designate a team in Evanston. And I think that in conjunction with a credible messenger, one or two credible messengers who, in my opinion, should, live in Evanston and have some connection to Evanston. I think that would be, personally, I think that would be the most impactful model to have here in Evanston in terms of our community responder model. So I just wanted to offer that, just so you know where my head is at. I had a meeting with, I went to a roll call with our Evanston Police Department, and what they expressed in the room, you could tell from what they expressed that they didn't have confidence that this could be a first response right now. They really saw the Trilogy program as something where after they've already went to the call, they then called Trilogy in either to respond that same day or next day for follow-up, right? And that's more in line with what a detective would do in certain situations, right? You have your patrol officers that are more first response, and then they pass it off to a detective. So in the same sense, this model right now really acts more as a detective, as follow-up, right, than it does first response. And I think to get it to first response, we're going to need a dedicated team in Evanston. At least it's what it's looking like right now. Amos, I don't know if you were going to say anything else, and then we'll open it up to if anybody else has any thoughts about this.
Yeah, well, I did have a one thing I forgot to say in a reaction, because that was really helpful. Thank you, Councilman. So first of all, one thing I wanted to just mention briefly is that, often the way people generally use the word peer is usually when people use the word peer, they're talking about somebody with lived experience in the areas of mental health, addiction, homelessness. And then you could use the word if you were, if I had personal experience with, let's say interaction with the justice system, and I was responding to somebody else who had a history with the justice system, I would be a peer to them, but people just don't tend to use the word peer for that. They tend to use it for kind of the behavioral health area. So I just wanted to say that quickly because it, I don't know, it's just kind of the convention about how people will use that.
No, that's helpful. And then like, what is the peer if you're responding to disturbance calls and other calls?
Right. Yeah, exactly. If you're responding to a suspicious person call, yeah, you could be a peer to this to the suspicious person, but that's just not the way we normally use the word. So then maybe we
thank you.
And then when it comes to the response time, I think it's a very important question, and this is where it gets complicated, because one thing that would be a fear that I might have is you say, okay, we're going to invest this money in getting Trilogy to respond to, kind of be more dedicated to Evanston and have faster response times. So what they're starting out with is a relatively narrow range of calls that they will be responding to. It's sort of pretty, what I would call sort of pure mental health calls, and it's also coming in through a specialized number, so they're not getting necessarily referrals from like 911, which is just what most people call, right? And so you can end up with a system where they have the bandwidth to respond quickly, but they aren't getting enough calls, and then people say, oh, well, see, we didn't need this. It's like, well, you do need it, but you just didn't connect it to the fire hose of calls coming into 911. And they're not addressing the broader range of calls that they could be handling, which is, someone calls the police or 911 because they can't get their kid to go to school, or because, they're having a dispute with their neighbor and barking dogs or whatever. They're not going to handle those calls. And so people get a picture of, oh, there isn't enough demand for a civilian responder team, because what the civilian responder team is, handling is a narrow subset.
Yeah, no, and I think even Trilogy's, I think even Trilogy is focused on connecting to 911, and also I think the state has talked about developing a new number, a 988 number, I believe, that hasn't been launched, but they're working on that. So I think the definitely the goal, no matter if it's Trilogy or a combination of Trilogy and city employees going out and doing outreach, I think at some point we're going to move more towards either connecting to 911 or having a separate 988 number whenever that launches. But I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other thoughts about this community responder model? Again, where right now we're kind of looking at the Brooklyn Center model, where what they've done is they're working to create a new department. This new department, the head of this new department would be a public health professional, and then under this new department, you'd have this, you'd have police, you'd have the fire department. In Evanston, we could have our youth and young adult development team under that, as well as some other departments. And but also in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, they have new departments that they've created. One is a community responder type department, right, which falls into what we're discussing today, and then they have one that I think deals more closely with traffic enforcement, I believe. So again, that's the context. Any thoughts about community responder models? Patrick, I don't know if your hand is still up from before, or if you have another thought you want to share.
It is not. I have another thought.
Please, yeah.
So it's a question, and you know what, Bobby? I totally forgot what the question. I totally forgot what the question was. Damn! It'll come back to me. It'll come back to me. Call on Kim.
We've all been there.
Call on Kim. It'll come to me.
Okay, we got other hands. Kimberly.
Hey, thanks for acknowledging me. I know I've been a little unplugged from this work lately, but
No.
I like what I'm hearing and just appreciate you all continuing to bring in more experts to kind of talk us through this. One thing I was wondering is just, have we done anything to sort of begin to analyze what this department would cost, or kind of what this structure would look like? And like, I'm just thinking of, any pushback we might want to anticipate around like taking this in a direction that's going to have a price tag that's maybe much different than what some of these disparate functions already do today, or what we've already sort of imagined that we'd want to spend just for something like this. Just wondering if we've given that any thought yet, or not, if we're not there.
Yeah, Amos, I'd love to hear your response on this, but I do want to say, again, it is good that the state, within this narrow area of community responder and mental health response, crisis response in particular, I think the state of Illinois has gave us a huge gift in that they've provided funding to support, crisis response for mental health related calls. So I think that's a big deal that other states, they may not have that available. And so their municipalities who are interested in doing these type of things might be more on the hook to come up with the funds for it. So that is a big deal. It allows us again, to maybe invest a bit more in the program and have this kind of designated team in Evanston, but it still costs a lot less than if we were to create like our own team entirely. It doesn't mean we won't have some employees that are responding to different disturbance and nuisance related calls, but again, it keeps the cost down a lot more than I think other municipalities may be experiencing who don't have that support from their state government. So that is a big deal. And then Amos, I don't know if you have any other thoughts about what this is cost in other places.
Yeah, so we're still working on exactly what the cost is of like kind of creating a new department. As far as the cost of having a program, so for example, Amherst did not like create a new department, but the responder program is under it is city employees. So it is, I guess, under the town manager. I'm actually not exactly sure how it's officially categorized, but they're city employees. And one of the benefits there, I'll say quickly before talking about the budget, is, as we've talked about, like with Trilogy, there is no one, if you wanted to contract this out to an external organization, there is no one organization in any city that is already up to speed to handle this range of calls. And that's why a lot of cities are like, well, yeah, if this were just a mental health thing, then yeah, we have organization that can, jump right on this. But if we're trying to get them to handle a bunch of different types of calls, maybe it makes sense for it to be housed within the city so that, we can actually handle the broad range of things that none of these organizations are kind of equipped to handle. And so I would say just a round number to have in your head is if you wanted a program that's like 24/7 or close to 24/7, that would probably be looking at about $1 million a year. That would just provide enough. I mean, that would probably just be like one responder team operating at a time. And so you might have like 5 teams total. that would cover 24/7 every day. And it might have been Patrick who mentioned this earlier, that, along with response times, police have a lot of concerns around, sure, it's great that this is happening during limited hours, but what about, I'm out on patrol on the night shift, and what do I do? And they, in terms of getting police buy-in, it's also important to have something like they will actually support something more that is 24/7 or close to it, because they want it to be consistent. They want it to be there it's like, well, look, if this is helpful, then it should be there on all the hours. They're tired of programs that close down at 5 p.m. and are not available after that time. So it actually can be helpful in trying to get public safety buy-in on that, even though it's obviously more expensive.
And as a quick add-on to that, I agree, because one thing that I hear a lot from our what's the name of it? Kind of community policing officers, called something else though, is that they always pride themselves on this, which is when someone calls, we respond.
The problem-solving team.
Problem-solving team. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
They always, Officer Howard, I've probably heard him say that, a bunch of different times during our ward meetings, and it's true. Like, they really pride themselves on it. They don't skip calls. If you call 911, someone will show up, and I think that's the level of consistency and that they're looking for, probably in other programs, I would imagine. Kimberly, did you have anything else on this?
No, I'm good. Thank you for that explanation, Amos.
Rose.
I'm going to defer to Patrick if he remembered his question, since he's a member of the task force.
You remember, Patrick?
Okay. My question, you might have kind of already answered this, but I was curious about whether you've seen cities do it, kind of contracting out to local organizations, or whether you're mostly seeing cities set up their own departments or programs fully staffed by city employees. And then what sort of Evanston's thoughts are on, so since there is this Trilogy program that has been created that's more contracted out, what would that look like here?
I can speak to the first or the second part, I think that was, but yeah, I mean, what I will say is I think, so one, Trilogy plans to and would like to connect to 911. So I think that's a good thing. Trilogy is transitioning to 24/7 crisis response. Right now, they're 24/7. Part of the time, I think until, I don't know if it's 5, 6, 7 p.m. is crisis, in-person crisis response, but they're 24 hours, 24/7. They have a 24/7 hotline number that you can call. But they plan in the next few weeks, I believe, I can't remember exactly when the launch is, to be 24/7. Or to be, I don't know if it's 24/7 or if it's probably still, it ends at around 6 or 7 p.m., but they plan to do that 7 days a week, maybe. I need to check.
It's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 7 days a week, starting March 14th.
There it is. Thank you so much for that, Patrick. Yeah. So I think we can, because of that, it's a really good start. Like I said, it's something that I don't think other states are doing. It's the reason why I believe what we need to do is have a designated Trilogy team in Evanston, headquartered somewhere here, and then hire additional employees, City of Evanston employees, to respond to calls that Trilogy can't respond to at this moment, at least. And I can see those two teams working well together. And we've talked about it with Trilogy. I think they're open to it. They just started, so they want a few more months to get some data in, so they know exactly what their call responses are, what types of calls they're getting, and what type of support services and other things that they may need. And then we're going to come back to the table and figure out what it would cost to have them here in Evanston, a designated team here in Evanston.
Is, just a quick follow-up question, Councilmember Burns, is that model, the Trilogy model, is it sustainable if the state funding dries up for the program?
No, I don't think so. But I don't have there hasn't been any indication right now that it will. It's not covering the full cost of the program, so they still need to supplement the program with private funding. So Trilogy on its own does fundraising for this program, but I don't see any reason now to believe that the state would cut the funding.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and I think that really gets to the heart of the challenge that a lot of places are having with finding that there's no perfect provider to handle a broad range of calls. And so do you get two different providers, or do you house it within the city? And different places are coming at it from different angles. I can tell you quickly that, so Cahoots that's a third party agency, the Whitebird Clinic, that handles it. And so, they have a relatively broad range of calls because they've been doing it for many years, but there's a lot of calls that they just don't really deal with. Also a third party in Denver, Olympia, Washington is also one of the longest existing programs. And they were originally a third party, like they contracted out, but it wasn't working out very well. And so they've actually transferred to be transitioned to become city employees, which I think is a great development for them. There are many others in Dayton, in Amherst. A lot of the newer ones are because they have a bit of a broader vision. They are becoming city employees. Obviously, you mentioned Brooklyn Center, Albuquerque. It's city employees, but there are plenty of both. Austin is contracted out. There's a broad range, and then I had one more thing to add. So I guess, well, I'll stop there and then see if it comes back to me. Yes,
I think we're a little more sensitive to trying to, trying to partner with other agencies where possible, because we already have a health department in Evanston, which most cities, I think there's only one other city in the state, one or two other cities in the state that have a health department. We're one of them. We also have a fully funded youth and young adult development team, which I think is about $1 million. That's basically where our $1 million is, right? It's in our existing youth and young adult development team. And they have outreach workers, about, I think, at least six or seven. And then I know I'm missing something. Then we also have a victim services department within our health department. So there's already a lot that the city does in investing in outreach and so and if we wanted to create another program, I think it benefits us to try to use the state funded program as much as possible, and then maybe have a few additional hires as needed. But I just want to give you some context. This is a city that does a lot, on that really leads in providing direct social services as a city with city employees already.
And that's, I should have been more clear that the cities haven't necessarily created a new department, and they have often, they have in some places, in Brooklyn Center and Albuquerque, I think in Ithaca, but in others, they've just found a home for the program within the city somewhere. So in Rochester, I think it's in the Department of Parks and Rec. People have been creative on that, but it would definitely be worth talking to, the youth services department and some of the other ones to understand their work, because it does sound like there's a lot of capacity that they've built in that area, and just it does seem definitely plausible that there could be a program housed within one of the city agencies, if desired. But the one thing I was going to add that I forgot was this is one of the big pieces where I see value in looking at the data, because that allows you to identify, okay, you can literally break down and say, okay, well, based on the types of calls that Trilogy is comfortable handling, once they get 911 calls, here's the volume of calls that's currently coming in that they would be comfortable handling. And then you can say, okay, here's the other volume of calls that could be handled by civilians that are outside of the scope that Trilogy is comfortable with. And then that gives you very concrete numbers to look at and say, oh, okay, now we can talk about how much value this would bring to Evanston and how much this would take off of the plate of police.
Yeah, any other thoughts, comments? Patrick, did you remember your question at all?
I did.
Okay.
And I would also just say, in adding information to the conversation regarding funding, the Biden administration has really been pushing through the Health and Human Services Department funding for 988 call centers, and funding alternative mental health crises units throughout the United States. And so I think that my hope is that with additional funding from the federal government, that it could shore up support at the state level. So I would just say that I think that the Pritzker administration is a good partner in the Biden administration in this effort. My question, which I remember, is Amos, Dr. King spoke about training for either the community, the credible community partner, potentially even the social worker or mental health responder in the community response model, having negotiation training. So I wanted to hear from you if you could speak about or put a little more meat on the bones as to the training that you have seen on the national landscape that responders have received. And just know that I have a real interest in hearing if any of the training has involved restorative practices as a model for mediation.
Well, I'd love to hear that. So, okay. First, I think he said mediation. And yeah, so basically, as you can imagine, if you're talking about the broader range of call types, that would include calls where you have some level of a dispute. And I mean, honestly, even if it's just what you would consider behavioral health calls, you end up with a lot of situations where you would benefit from that type of expertise. We see a lot of benefit from restorative justice. For people who are not familiar, it's where you have kind of bringing together. It's similar to mediation, except that you often have sort of one person that is kind of the harmed party and the other person who has committed the harm. And so there's a process to figure out how to, first of all, convey the harm that was caused and make sure that the person takes responsibility for it. And so in many ways it's similar to mediation. And in showing up to a scene as a first response, that's a little bit new for restorative justice. So we've been talking to a lot of restorative justice practitioners about it, and they're very excited about it. And they recognize that, so in many cases, it would be great for the responders to have restorative justice training, especially so that they're able to bring things into a restorative justice process. It's unlikely that, right on scene, you wouldn't go straight into a traditional restorative justice or mediation process, because those take a lot of preparation. It's more about using a lot of the principles and then setting up for a process. But both of those processes are it's tremendously important to have those types of skills in the hands of the responders, because frankly, I mean, we haven't looked at Evanston data, but in other jurisdictions, there's a tremendous amount of calls that are these sort of low-level disputes that you want to be able to try to, of course, de-escalate the tension,
but figure out, where do we go from here? And am I just going to calm things down and then go away and then come back next week when it flares up again? Or do we have a way of actually bringing this to some sort of a resolution?
Patrick, any follow-ups or? Okay. Any other questions, comments, reactions, anything else? Okay. Amos, if you could close then with just explaining a little bit about how LEAP has partnered with Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, and then maybe a bit about how you think you can work with us.
Yes. So I think that, in terms of things that we can bring to the conversation, I mean, we're happy to just advise and provide, information about what other cities are doing. We're very interested in engaging on, if you haven't figured it out already, I'm very interested in kind of the data analysis. Partly because it allows you to demonstrate, look, this is the volume of calls that we're talking about here. This is a substantial, it could be 30% of the current citizen-initiated calls for service. Like, that is a huge amount of what's currently on the plate of police. But also because when you have those types of details, you are able to have a conversation with city leadership, police, dispatch. They just take things much more seriously when you have the details, and you're able to say, these are the call types that we're talking about. These are the types of calls that we're talking about. Here's how many of them there are. Or just be able to talk about the dispatch process itself and how exactly could this work. So those types of questions are ways that we can come in and be helpful. And for most of the conversations where we're trying to be helpful with, let's say, the police or dispatch, we bring in for example, a police major here in Baltimore who ran the dispatch center and things. And so he's our credible messenger to talk to the police. So we, with many of these things, what we found is it's not just about the message, it's about the messenger. And so we really believe that having the right messenger come in can make such a huge difference in how that message is received. So those are the kind of data analysis, and bringing in law enforcement messengers are two things that we've done quite a bit in other cities. And we're happy to talk more about how this might fit into what you all are doing, because I know what you're doing is going beyond just talking about community responders. But we're very excited that you all are doing this work.
Thanks, Amos. And I think the way I understand it is, so early on, I had the privilege of working with our city clerk's office to help Robin Simmons, former alderwoman of the Fifth Ward, in making a case for reparations, local reparations here in Evanston. And so I think similarly, Amos and Dr. King and Lee can help us make a case for a community responder model, as well as just the kind of structural change that we're at least discussing preliminary right now, that hopefully can move through the process at some point. So thank you, Amos, for that. And so I'm gonna request a lot of data in the next few days, and we're gonna bring that information back to this committee to discuss, if that sounds good for everybody, just to get a sense again of what types of calls we're talking about, so that we can prepare ourselves to speak in a much more detailed manner about what we're trying to do. And then also, I think we'll continue the series of kind of meeting partnering organizations that partner with Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, to get them to where they are now. And so, Kadeen, I don't know if we could potentially meet the Fuse Fellows. I know we met with them, Mayor Biss and I, and Kadeen met with Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, the mayor of Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, and I believe they're Fuse Fellow, but maybe it would be great to introduce both, or one of the Fuse Fellows, to our committee. So Kadeem, before we leave, what do you
Yeah,
what do you
so
think?
they're definitely interested. I think just if we can give a couple of options of dates that you would want, and then we could circle back with them. So they're ready to go. And I think both of them would come to the whatever next meeting they're able to.
Beautiful. So yeah, we might have an opportunity then to meet with the mayor of Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, as well as their Fuse fellow. That has how would you put it, Kadeem? That the Fuse fellow is kind of the project manager for the work.
Yeah, so in two buckets, one is data, the other is community engagement, and they're the point people to really identify what needs to be done and help to get it done. And so, yeah, huge value added.
And they'll give us a sense of how we can, explore getting a Fuse fellow of our own here in Evanston, so they can talk a little bit about how that process works. So, if that sounds good, that'll be our next steps. Is trying to request data from the Evanston Police Department and review it here as a committee, and then inviting the mayor of Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, as well as a Fuse fellow that's supporting their work to our next meeting. Does that sound good?
Yep. So if you could just give me the dates that you're thinking, and then I'll circle back with them tomorrow.
Perfect. Does that sound good for all the Patrick, Kimberly? I'm not trying to see who else is on here, and then even community members with us. Does all that sound good? And what are we missing anything?
That sounds good to me. I guess
sounds good.
one point of interest that I have is, Bobby, I think we've reached some level of consensus around restructuring within the department and what it could look like. I'm just curious. I'm just thinking out loud and curious where your head is at, Bobby, as to whether or not we're at a stage where it would even make sense to start drafting an ordinance or a resolution as they did in Brooklyn Center. What are your thoughts on that?
I feel like because I think we have time to prepare ourselves. I would like to have something a bit more detailed than that. And an ordinance would be, I mean, if we're drafting an ordinance, that is a detailed, that would be a detailed draft of what we're trying to do. And I guess so the question is, my response would be, I don't know if we're ready for an ordinance yet. We might be ready for a resolution, but I think it would be helpful to just better understand the model that we're looking to adopt here in Evanston first, and then to run that by the community. As Ms. Esther always reminds us, once we have something for the community to react to, have them take a look at it, and then once we complete that step, then prepare an ordinance that that the full council can discuss and make changes to and hopefully adopt. So that's where my head is at, unless people think there's another course of action we should take. And Kadeem can speak to this much better than I can, but I know when they created their resolution, there was a really an outpour of kind of anger and frustration as a result of a police-related, not just shooting, but murder, killing in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, if I understand that correctly. And so I think they had the political capital they needed to quickly pass a resolution, right? To do the work of drafting a resolution, to quickly pass a resolution, whereas I don't think we have a similar event that would make me feel we could get something passed right now. So I would say let's probably do the work, making a case for it, and when we're ready, bring that to the community, and then after that, bring it to the council.
And that's
Sounds good.
accurate. Yep. In terms of what happened there.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm gonna let folks go. I gotta hop, unfortunately, to another meeting. But I want to give one more opportunity. If anybody has anything else they want to say, Amos, I just want to thank you for coming out, and I'll let Dr. King know through email that we appreciate him for coming out. Rose, Patrick, Matthew, of course, Kimberly, Kadeen. Thank you for continuing to participate in these conversations. It's really helpful. Does anybody have anything else to say before we go? Feel free to unmute and just say it out loud.
Thank you, Councilmember Burns.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Amos.
Good night,
Yeah,
Yeah,
everybody.
good to see you.
Okay. We'll be in touch real soon with the next meeting date. Okay. All right. Take care. Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Good
everybody.
night.